I watched lawyers carry my family's heirlooms out of my home. But losing my house wasn't what broke me. It was seeing my own cousin signing the eviction papers. She smiled and said the words that still haunt me. The military doesn't pay enough to save you from this little hero. The morning they came, the light through my grandmother's stained glass window painted rainbows across the hardwood floors my great-grandfather had laid with his own hands. I sat in my wheelchair by that window, tracing the familiar grooves in the oak, each scratch and dent a chapter in our family story. This house wasn't just wood and stone. It was my sanctuary after the desert, after the shrapnel, after learning to navigate a world that had suddenly become 2 feet shorter. The scent of old books and lemon polish was the only thing that could quiet the ghost that followed me home from deployment. My name is Captain Elena Reyes. The Army gave me a purpose. This house gave me roots. And today, I was about to lose both. The door came down with a splintering crash that echoed through the halls. No knock, no warning, just the brutal efficiency of men with paperwork and no compassion. 3 lawyers in $1,000 suits marched in like they owned the air they were breathing. Behind them came movers in matching uniforms, their hands already reaching for my life. Captain Reyes, the lead lawyer said, not asking, just announcing, "We're here to execute the court order." I watched them take my father's writing desk first, the one where he'd written love letters to my mother during Vietnam, then my grandmother's china, each plate painted with violets that matched the ones in her garden. They handled history like it was inventory. "Please," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "there must be some mistake." The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, his nameplate read, smiled without warmth. "No mistake, Captain. The foreclosure is complete. The debt has been called." And then she walked in, my cousin Chloe. Her heels clicked a staccato rhythm on the heart pine floors our ancestors had walked for generations. She held a leather portfolio like a weapon. "Elena," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "I told you we could do this the easy way." My breath caught. "Chloe, what are you doing here?" She opened the portfolio, revealing documents with crisp official seals. "Signing the transfer papers. As the executor of Uncle James's estate, it's my duty to see this through." I stared at her, this woman I'd shared Christmas dinners with, who I'd comforted through her first divorce, who knew what this house meant to our family. "The estate was settled years ago," I whispered. "This house is mine." She leaned down, her perfume, something expensive and floral, filling the space between us. "The house was collateral for the loan you took out for your medical modifications." Her eyes drifted to my wheelchair. "And you defaulted." I remembered then the paperwork she'd brought me after I returned from the hospital, when the painkillers made the world swim and trust came easy. "You said it was for property taxes, for preservation." "A technicality." She waved a dismissive hand. "The important thing is the development company is very excited about this property. The land alone is worth millions." The movers were packing my military shadow box now, the one with my medals, my patches, the flag that had flown over my base in Afghanistan. "Stop," I commanded, my officer's voice cutting through the room. Every mover froze. Chloe sighed dramatically. "Elena, don't make this harder than it has to be." She took the pen from her portfolio and offered it to me. "Just sign, and we can be done with this. I'll even make sure you get a few of the smaller pieces. Grandmother's jewelry, perhaps." I looked from her face to the lawyers, to the movers holding my life in their hands. "You planned this. You waited until I was at my most vulnerable. Her smile was all teeth. The military doesn't pay enough to save you from this, little hero. The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Little hero, as if my service, my sacrifice, was a child's game. Amba? In that moment, something in me shifted. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all crystallized into something hard and sharp and dangerous. I took the pen, but instead of signing, I clicked it closed and laid it gently on the arm of my wheelchair. No, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. Chloe's smile faltered. What did you say? I said no. I met her eyes, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in them. You think because I can't walk, I can't fight? You think because I served my country, I'm weak? I reached for the military-issue satellite phone I kept charging by my chair, the one with the direct line to JAG, the one I'd never thought I'd need for something like this. What are you doing? Chloe asked, a note of panic entering her voice. Calling in reinforcements, I said, my fingers moving with muscle memory. You see, cousin, you're not just stealing from a disabled veteran, you're stealing from the United States Army. The phone connected after one ring. JAG command, this is Captain Elena Reyes, serial number 845923711. I have a situation involving illegal seizure of property and potential violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. I watched the color drain from Chloe's face. The lawyers had stopped their work and were watching with growing alarm. Yes, sir, I continued into the phone. I believe this constitutes fraud targeting a disabled service member, and there may be additional charges under the Stolen Valor Act. They're currently handling my military awards without authorization. One of the lawyers began frantically gathering his papers. We should go, he muttered to Sterling. But it was too late. In the distance, the familiar sound of military vehicles approaching, the deep rumble of Humvees, the sharp bark of official engines. Through the shattered doorway, I saw them, 2 military police vehicles pulling up, their lights flashing in silent, serious rhythm. Armed MPs in perfect uniform emerged, their movements precise, professional, and utterly terrifying to civilians who thought paperwork was power. The lead MP, a sergeant with eyes that had seen real battles, entered what was left of my home. He took in the scene, the packed boxes, the weeping cousin, the lawyers frozen in fear, and me in my wheelchair, still holding the phone. Captain Reyes, he said, rendering a sharp salute. Sergeant Miller, 101st Military Police. We received your call. I returned the salute. Sergeant, these civilians are attempting to illegally seize property protected under military law. Chloe found her voice shrill and desperate. This is a legal eviction. We have papers. The sergeant didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on me. Ma'am, what are your orders? I looked at my cousin, at the lawyers, at the pieces of my life packed away in cardboard boxes, and I smiled. Sergeant, I said, my voice clear and commanding, I believe these gentlemen need to be educated on exactly who they're dealing with. The sergeant almost smiled back. Yes, ma'am. And as the MPs moved to secure the scene, I knew this wasn't about saving my house anymore. This was about justice. The air in my grandmother's living room changed in an instant. The scent of lemon polish was replaced by the crisp smell of starch and gun oil. The lawyer's expensive cologne suddenly seemed cheap against the clean, military scent of justice. Sergeant Miller took one step forward, just one, and the entire balance of power in the room flipped. Gentlemen, he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority, You will return every item to its exact position. You will handle Captain Reyes's property with the respect due to a decorated officer. And you, his eyes locked on Mr. Sterling, will explain to me which part of the Service Members Civil Relief Act you failed to understand. Sterling puffed up, his lawyerly instincts kicking in. I have a court order, signed by Judge Invalid. A new voice cut through the room. Captain Jennifer Wu stood in the doorway, her JAG uniform crisp, her eyes sharp behind practical glasses. She carried a simple leather briefcase that somehow looked more dangerous than any weapon. Captain Wu, United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, she announced, her voice cutting through the room like a laser. The SCRA requires specific procedures when dealing with active duty or recently separated service members. Procedures you deliberately circumvented. She didn't wait for an answer. She walked to my wheelchair and knelt, her professional demeanor softening for just a moment. Captain Reyes, I've reviewed your file. We'll handle this. I watched as she stood and turned back to the lawyers, transforming from concerned colleague to legal predator in the space of a heartbeat. Mr. Sterling, she said, opening her briefcase, your firm has a history of targeting veterans. We've been building a case for 6 months. Today, you just handed us the cornerstone. Chloe found her voice, though it trembled. This is ridiculous. We followed every procedure. Captain Wu didn't even look at her. She placed a document on my grandfather's oak desk, the one the movers had been about to carry out. Procedure? She arched an eyebrow. You mean like forging a captain's signature while she was undergoing spinal reconstruction at Walter Reed? Like backdating documents to before her medical retirement? Like using a power of attorney that was revoked when her cousin, she finally looked at Chloe, was caught embezzling from the family trust 3 years ago? The blood drained from Chloe's face so completely, I thought she might faint. I watched as Captain Wu laid out document after document, each one a piece of the trap Chloe and these lawyers had built for me and were now caught in themselves. Your development company, Captain Wu continued, has acquired 12 properties from vulnerable veterans in the past 18 months, all through similar creative paperwork. Sterling tried to bluster. Those are serious accusations. We'll sue for... You'll be lucky if you're not sharing a cell with your clients by sundown, Sergeant Miller interrupted, his hand resting on his sidearm. Now, I believe Captain Reyes gave an order. You will unpack every box carefully. What followed was the most beautiful humiliation I've ever witnessed. Those 3 lawyers in their $1,000 suits forced to unpack my grandmother's china with their own hands. The movers stood back, watching with a kind of horrified fascination. Wow. Chloe stood frozen by the door, tears streaming down her face. Elena, please. I didn't mean... I wheeled over to her, the sound of my chair the only noise in the suddenly silent room. You didn't mean to steal my home? I asked quietly. You didn't mean to use my service against me? You didn't mean to call me little hero like it was an insult? She couldn't meet my eyes. I remembered us as children, playing hide and seek in this very house. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike in the driveway. I remembered holding her hand at her mother's funeral. You were family, I whispered. That was supposed to mean something. Just then, a black government sedan pulled up outside. A man in an immaculate suit emerged, followed by 2 state troopers. Captain Wu nodded in satisfaction. Right on time. The new arrival introduced himself as Agent Carter from the State Bar Association. Mr. Sterling, Miss Chen, Mr. Rodriguez, I'm here to inform you that your law licenses have been suspended effective immediately. We'll be taking your client files into state custody. Sterling actually staggered back a step. You can't. We can, Agent Carter said calmly. And we are. The military police have shared compelling evidence of fraud, forgery, and ethics violations that would make any bar association blush. As the state troopers began collecting the lawyers' briefcases and phones, Captain Wu came to kneel beside me again. Captain Reyes, she said softly, this is where we need your decision. We can press federal charges that will put them away for a decade. Or, she glanced at Chloe, we can offer a plea deal that returns your property and ensures they never practice law again. I looked around my home, the walls that had sheltered 4 generations of my family, the floors that had absorbed our laughter and tears, the stained glass window casting those same rainbows on the hardwood. Chloe was sobbing now, truly broken. I'm sorry, Elena. I was desperate. The development company offered me so much money. The anger that had sustained me began to ebb, replaced by something colder and more profound. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about restoration. Make the deal, I said quietly, but on one condition. Captain Wu nodded. Name it. I looked at my cousin, at the shattered remains of our relationship. The development company pays to restore this house completely, and they fund a legal aid service for other veterans facing the same predators. Captain Wu smiled, a genuine, fierce smile. That's the kind of justice I joined the JAG Corps to deliver. As the lawyers were escorted out, their careers in ruins, and Chloe was led away to negotiate the terms of her surrender, Sergeant Miller came to stand by my chair. Ma'am, he said quietly, you handled that like a true officer. Many would have chosen vengeance. I looked at the rainbows dancing on the floor, at the familiar grooves in the wood, at the house that was mine again. They taught us in officer training that true strength isn't in destroying your enemies, but in turning them into examples, in making sure no one else has to fight the same battle. The military police had taken more than their licenses today. They'd taken their power, their arrogance, their belief that they could prey on those who served. And as the last police car pulled away, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a different kind of service. The silence after the storm was deafening. My house stood empty again, but this time it was a different kind of empty, not of possessions, but of trust. The ghosts of betrayal lingered in every room. For 3 days, I moved through the spaces where my life had been packed away, touching the familiar surfaces that had almost been lost. The military police had left 2 guards outside, not for protection, but as a statement. The United States Army was watching. Captain Wu worked from my dining room table, her laptop connected to secure military networks. The development company is fighting back, Elena. They've hired new counsel, bigger, more expensive sharks. I wheeled over to the window, watching the rain streak down the stained glass. Let them come. They arrived at noon on the 4th day. 3 new lawyers in even more expensive suits, accompanied by a man who looked like he'd never been told no in his life, Mr. Thorne, the development company's CEO. He didn't wait for an invitation, striding into my home as if he already owned it. Captain Reyes, he said, his voice slick with false sympathy, I understand there's been a misunderstanding. Captain Wu stood, her posture rigid. This is private property, Mr. Thorne. You're trespassing. Am I? He smiled, a predator's smile. My company holds the legitimate mortgage on this property, and I have a court order, a real one this time, signed by a federal judge who understands business, not sentiment. He laid the documents on my grandmother's table. They looked official, they looked real, and they threatened everything we'd fought for. What followed was a battle fought with paperwork and precedents. Captain Wu worked through the night, her fingers flying across keyboards, her voice sharp on conference calls with JAG headquarters. They're arguing the SCRA doesn't apply because you're medically retired, she told me at 3 a.m., her eyes red with exhaustion. They're claiming the mortgage was commercial, not residential. They're using every loophole. I watched the moonlight through my bedroom window, the same moonlight that had watched over generations of my family. What are our chances? She didn't sugarcoat it. 50-50. The law is on our side, but their judge is powerful, and their pockets are deep. The next morning, the story broke in the financial press. Decorated veteran exploiting system to keep family mansion. The article painted me as a privileged officer using military connections to avoid legitimate debts. Then came the photos, me in my wheelchair at various veterans events, captioned to suggest I was living large while other veterans suffered. My cousin Chloe had given them everything. I read the comments online, strangers calling me greedy, entitled, a disgrace to the uniform. Each word felt like shrapnel tearing open old wounds. But the worst was yet to come. That afternoon, a familiar car pulled up. My Uncle David, Chloe's father, the man who taught me to fish, who'd walked me down the aisle when my own father couldn't. He didn't knock, just walked in and stood before me, his face a mask of disappointment. "Elena," he said, his voice heavy, "you're tearing this family apart. Chloe made a mistake, but this vengeance has to stop." I stared at him, my heart breaking all over again. Uncle David, they tried to steal my home. They mocked my service. "Your service," he exploded. "That's all we've heard about for years. Your sacrifice, your medals. Do you think you're the only one who's ever suffered?" He pointed a shaking finger at me. "My daughter is facing prison because of you, your own flesh and blood." And what was I to her? I shot back, my voice cracking. What was this house? Just real estate to be liquidated? "It's just a house, Elena, bricks and wood, but you're willing to destroy our family for it." The words hung between us, the chasm too wide to cross. In that moment, I understood. They would never see what this house meant. They would never understand that some things are worth fighting for, not because of their monetary value, but because of their soul. After he left, I wheeled myself to the basement, the one place the lawyers hadn't touched. In an old trunk, beneath my father's fishing gear, I found what I was looking for: my deployment boxes. Not the medals or the official records, the real memories. Letters from soldiers I'd commanded, photos of us in the desert, young and scared but together. The flag we'd flown over our base on September 11th. Captain Wu found me there hours later, surrounded by memories. "Elena, what are you doing?" I looked up, tears streaming down my face, remembering who I am, remembering what I fought for. I handed her a photograph, me standing with a group of young soldiers, all of us smiling despite the dust and danger. These were my soldiers. I promised them I'd always have their backs, and I keep my promises. The next morning, we didn't go to court. We went to war. Captain Wu arranged a press conference on my front lawn. Not with financial reporters, but with military journalists and veteran advocates. I sat in my wheelchair, my dress uniform carefully pressed, my medals gleaming in the morning sun. Behind me stood Sergeant Miller and a dozen other veterans who'd heard what was happening and come to stand with me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady despite the cameras, "this isn't about a house. This is about the principle that those who serve this country should not be preyed upon when they come home." I held up the documents the lawyers had filed. They call me entitled. They say I'm exploiting the system, but the only exploitation happening here is of vulnerable veterans by greedy corporations. I looked directly into the cameras, imagining Chloe and Mr. Thorne watching, imagining every other predator out there who thought veterans were easy targets. "The United States Army taught me many things," I said, "but the most important was this: we never leave our people behind, and we will not be left behind when we come home." As I finished speaking, a remarkable thing happened. Cars began pulling up, veterans from every branch, every conflict, some in uniform, some in motorcycle cuts, some using canes and walkers like me. A man in a Marine Corps jacket stepped forward. "Captain Reyes, we heard what's happening. We're here to help." Then another, a Navy veteran. "My unit lost our homes after Katrina to predators like these. We won't let it happen to you." Soon there were hundreds of them surrounding my property, not as protesters, but as guardians. Mr. Thorne's lawyers arrived for the afternoon court session to find a wall of veterans blocking their path, not threatening, just present. Inside the courtroom, the judge took one look at the crowd outside and sighed. "Counselor," he said to Thorne's lawyer, "I suggest you advise your client to settle this matter today." But it was too late for settlements. Captain Wu stood, a new file in her hand. "Your Honor, we have evidence that this development company has systematically targeted over 50 veterans across 3 states. We also have proof of judge shopping, witness intimidation, and fraud." She placed the file on the bench. "The United States Attorney's Office has just opened a criminal investigation." I watched Mr. Thorne's face go pale, watched his lawyers start gathering their papers with shaking hands, watched the house of cards they'd built come tumbling down. But the real victory came from outside, where the veterans had begun singing the Army hymn, their voices rising in perfect harmony. We had lost some battles, but we were winning the war. They say victory is sweet, but true victory is quiet. It's the peace that comes not from destroying your enemies, but from building something that outlasts them. The criminal investigation unfolded with military precision. Mr. Thorne's development company collapsed under the weight of 57 separate indictments. The 3 original lawyers lost their licenses permanently and faced federal prison time. And my cousin Chloe, she took a plea deal that required her to testify against the others in exchange for probation. But the real justice came in the form of checks, massive settlements from the development company's insurance and the lawyers' malpractice policies, not just for me, but for every veteran they'd targeted. 6 months later, my house underwent a transformation, not just repairs, but a rebirth. We installed ramps that blended seamlessly with the original architecture. We created a home office with voice-activated systems. We built a garden path wide enough for my wheelchair, lined with the same violets my grandmother had planted 60 years earlier. The day the workers finished, I wheeled through every room, touching the restored woodwork, the repaired stained glass, the reinforced floors. The house felt different, not just restored, but strengthened, like me. Captain Wu visited with the final paperwork. It's over, Elena. The last settlement has been dispersed. 34 veterans have kept their homes because of you. My Uncle David came to see me on a rainy afternoon. He stood on the porch for a long time before knocking, as if gathering courage. Elena, he said when I opened the door, his voice thick with emotion, I was wrong about everything. I watched the rain streak down his face. Or were those tears? Come in, Uncle. He walked through the restored rooms, his hands trembling as he touched familiar surfaces. Your father loved this house. He'd be so proud of you. Would he? I asked quietly. Or would he be disappointed I tore the family apart? My uncle turned to me, his eyes full of grief. Some things need to be torn down before they can be rebuilt stronger. I see that now. The following month, we launched the Veterans Haven Legal Defense Fund from my restored dining room. Captain Wu agreed to serve as legal director. Sergeant Miller volunteered to head security for our clients, and dozens of other veterans offered their skills: accounting, counseling, home repairs. Our first client was a Marine who'd lost his landscaping business to predatory lenders. Our second was an Air Force nurse facing eviction because her landlord wanted to convert her apartment to condos. At our inaugural board meeting, Captain Wu raised a glass to Captain Reyes, who proved that one soldier with the right support can take on an army of predators. But I shook my head. To all of us, because we finally learned what they taught us in basic training. We're stronger together. Chloe came to see me on the anniversary of the eviction attempt. She looked older, humbler, dressed in simple clothes instead of designer labels. I'm working as a paralegal for legal aid, she told me, her eyes downcast. The court mandated it, but I like it, helping people who can't afford lawyers. I watched her carefully. Is that why you came? To tell me you've reformed? She finally met my gaze. I came to thank you. That surprised me. She continued, if you'd pressed charges, I'd be in prison. Instead, you gave me a chance to become someone our grandmother would be proud of. She handed me a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside was our grandmother's recipe book, the one I thought had been lost forever. I found it in my things, she whispered. I was going to keep it, but now I think it belongs here. A year to the day after the lawyers had marched into my home, I hosted a party. Not a victory celebration, but a homecoming. Veterans from our legal defense fund filled the house with laughter and stories. Captain Wu and Sergeant Miller stood by the fireplace, looking like they'd always belonged there. My Uncle David came, and Chloe, too, hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome. But when she saw the recipe book open on the kitchen counter, with flour dusting the pages as I made our grandmother's famous cinnamon rolls, she broke into a genuine smile. Can I help? She asked softly. I nodded, making space for her at the counter. Grandma would want us to do this together. As evening fell, I wheeled out to the garden where my father had proposed to my mother. The violets she'd planted glowed in the twilight, their fragrance filling the air. Captain Wu joined me, handing me a glass of lemonade. You know, the JAG Corps is starting a new program specifically for veteran property rights. They want you to consult. I smiled, watching fireflies dance over the lawn. I think I've found my post-service mission, Jennifer. She followed my gaze to where Chloe was laughing with a group of veterans, finally finding her place in the world. You didn't just save your house, Elena. You saved your family. I looked at the restored house, at the people filling it with life, at the cousin who had found redemption through service. The military police hadn't just taken licenses that day. They'd given me back my purpose. The next morning, a young Army specialist came to my door. She was in a wheelchair like mine, her eyes shadowed by the same fears I'd once known. "Captain Reyes," she said nervously, "they told me you could help. The bank is trying to foreclose on my apartment, and I'm still at Walter Reed." I wheeled back to let her in. "Come inside," I said gently. "You're safe now. We take care of our own." As I closed the door behind her, I caught my reflection in the stained glass, a woman who had almost lost everything, but had found something more precious instead. The house was more than wood and stone. It was a promise, a sanctuary, a legacy, and it would shelter generations yet to come. They took everything but my will to fight. And in the end, that was the one weapon they couldn't steal, because the Army doesn't just teach you how to defend your country, it teaches you how to defend what matters. If this story of resilience and justice inspired you, do two things. So, subscribe and ring the bell for more powerful veteran stories. Comment below with the American flag. If you stand with our veterans, your engagement helps us tell more stories that honor those who served.